Hello and welcome to the IdeaCast interview series, episode number 125. My guest in this episode is Gabby Wnek, and Gabby is a licensed clinical social worker and a somatic experiencing practitioner with over 8 years of clinical experience helping women through burnout, anxiety, depression, stress, and trauma. And Gabby has a bachelor's in social work and psychology, as well as she'd gotten her master's in social work. And she's also a certified somatic experiencing practitioner. And Gabby had incorporated a coaching practice into her licensed social work practice, and this gave her a broader set of tools to work with people in dealing with stress and burnout and trauma. And she has a kind of a posteriori knowledge as someone who was burning themselves out and getting a little worn down by what she was trying to do. So she has that kind of experience to help people and can empathize better. So we talk about that, and it was great having her as a guest, and I hope you all enjoy the conversation and have good takeaways from it. Thank you very much for being here. And I'd like to welcome Gabby Wnek to the IdeaCast interview series. Gabby and I have pre-meets with 99% of the people that I have conversations with, because I don't want to just jump in and not know who I'm talking to or anything like that. But Gabby and I had a really nice pre-meet conversation, and I think that energy is going to move into this conversation, and we're going to allow the audience to find out not only about you, but what you do and the role you're playing in this world to help folks out. So Gabby, welcome. Glad to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me and for the opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. And to the YouTube audience, welcome. Always glad to have you there, especially my subscribers, because you guys are subscribers and I'm grateful to you for
Yes.
being there. So anyway, but thank you for your support and your presence in this conversation. So Gabby, as we were saying before we hit record, I think it's important not only to find out more about you, but to, again, establish some context about what we're going to talk about for the next 45 minutes to an hour. So if you would like to share your story, where you are now and what brought you to where you are now. So that would be awesome.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you so much. I went to school as a biology and secondary education major. And boy, did that change very quickly as I found out that I was good at biology. And I come from a line of teachers. My mom's a teacher, brother, sister-in-law, aunts in Poland are teachers.
Wow.
You name it. And then I was like, well, I don't want to teach, especially secondary education with high schoolers and middle schoolers, like not my thing.
Yeah.
So I went undecided and I took like an intro class to psychology with a sports psychologist, and I fell in love. I was like, this is it. This is it. I want to do this. And so then I declared psychology, and I had a little bit of extra credits left, and the overachiever in me was like, well, I might as well minor. And then I met the Department of Social Work and ended up double majoring. The overachiever was so happy within me. And then eventually I got my master's in social work because I wanted to do marriage and family therapy and wanted to go to Northwestern, where it costs $98,000 for 2 years. And I went, no, not going to do that because that's crazy expensive. And so because I got my bachelor's in social work, I could just get my master's in a year. It's called advanced standing, which is really nice.
Okay.
And then I graduated, and actually when I was still in college, I developed chronic pelvic pain, which is a huge part of my story.
Okay.
And it was like I had really bad anxiety and really chronic at that point pelvic pain that I didn't really know where it was coming from. Okay. And so I graduated and I started working in community mental health in order to get my clinical hours to sit for my clinical licensure in Illinois, in my state where I live. And this whole time I'm dealing with really chronic anxiety, chronic pelvic pain, really intense clients in community mental health. And this is where my burnout story starts, unconsciously for me. And I ended up taking a sabbatical because the pain was so bad. And I found a clinic in California that helped with chronic pelvic pain through meditation and through PT, like your own PT that you do at home.
Okay.
And that was really helpful. And I took a significant amount of time off, probably like 6 to 9 months before I went back to work. And meditation, I think, saved my life.
Mm.
It took me a year and a half to meditate for 45 minutes because my nervous system was just so dysregulated. But that practice really helped me. So fast forward, I've had this kind of on and off battle with burnout and chronic pain and anxiety because not only is my nervous system dysregulated, right? I'm taking in a lot of clients' trauma, right? While also dealing with my own. And it really wasn't until last year where the burnout was, or 2 years ago at this point, the burnout was so bad that I looked at a client, I went, I don't care what you're talking about. Like, I really just, I don't care. You can leave. Why am I here? What am I doing?
Mm.
And in that moment, I went, oh my gosh, like, first of all, you shouldn't be in the room right now because it was like complete apathy.
Yeah.
Like, it was just, I don't care. Like, why am I here? Why am I doing this? So I went to my supervisor and I told her, I need to go home. And I also knew it was a bigger problem. It wasn't just like I could take the day off or the weekend or take a vacation and it was going to be okay.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it wasn't just going to be okay. And so, I did take the day off and I just realized that it was a bigger issue. Didn't do anything about it then. It took me months of essentially taking Klonopin every night because that was the only thing that touched my pain and anxiety,
Right.
where I essentially kind of became a zombie, right? I would come home with 9, 10 level pain. I would have to take a Klonopin because I had to go back to work the next day.
Mm-hmm.
And it was probably last year in around April where I went, Gabby, stop. Like, you cannot keep sacrificing your physical and mental health for a job. Like, this is not worth it anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so funny because I was working with a coach and she told me, she goes, I knew you were going to quit your job the moment I started working with you. And I was like, oh, she goes, you just weren't ready to hear that. And you weren't ready to make that decision until you got to a breaking point. And so I quit. I said, enough is enough. Like, this, there's got to be a better way of working with clients than seeing 30 clients a week, 25 or 30 clients a week, and not getting paid much of anything. And so I discovered coaching, and that's kind of where the coaching business began, right? Of, this is a better way of helping clients. I can specialize in burnout and anxiety because I've been through it and I'm now on the other side. And I can help people not get to a point where I did. Like, I don't want people getting to that kind of a breaking point where they feel like a zombie and they're like literally at rock bottom.
Mm-hmm.
Because it was one of the worst things I've ever gone through, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I want to help people. I just want to help people in a way where I'm filling my own cup so that I can help other people.
Yeah. Yeah. And so many times as we are, and I'm sort of generalizing here, but a lot of folks are brought up that you, especially women, are brought up that you put your interests aside so that you can focus on fill in the blanks interests, parent, child, partner, all these things. And so that you were able to break out of that kind of cycle and be aware of it is testimony to self-realization in that sense. And this is not funny for the client that you had at your moment of reckoning, but I just started thinking of back in the 70s, Newhart was a therapist and Frasier, for the 90s, and just seeing the scene in if your life was a sitcom that the client or the patient would start working therapy on you. And it's like, oh, let's talk about this. Let's talk about your indifference to my suffering.
Exactly.
I just had this Frasier moment or something.
I know
it's not funny for your client or your patient, but I was just like, oh my God.
I mean, during that time though, I did have clients ask me like, are you okay? Like, they saw it. And like, as much as us therapists, like, we have poker faces and we don't let our issues affect or come into the therapeutic relationship, we're also human.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard not to 100% of the time not let our issues affect the therapeutic relationship.
Right.
And once I noticed that clients were asking, I was like, okay, like, there's a really big issue here because this shouldn't be happening. But it does, because I think as a society, we are taught to just push. until we can't push anymore. I think, like you said, especially women, like just push, like, and men too, honestly,
Oh
like,
yeah. We destroy
push.
ourselves too, but you know, I'd say that the pressure from men is men, you know, it is inherited by socially by our male upbringers, bringer uppers or whatever, our parents and
Mhm.
so forth. But yeah, I notice in my relationship with the women in my life that I hear that, and I can see the trail, the lineage of where that's coming from. So it's different, but the same. Yeah, I think I agree with
Absolutely.
you.
Yeah.
The
And
results are
so
certainly the same too.
they are, and it's like, you know, we are not built to push that much, right? We are built to exert and then rest, but we're also not taught as a society to rest because
Yeah,
rest equals guilt for so many people. If I rest, then I'm a bad person or I'm a bad mom or you fill in the blank. It's so easy
yeah.
to fill in the blank versus like we need rest. Like that is an essential part of being human.
Yeah. And in your case, you were a commodity that needed to continue to produce. And so that
Correct.
is that, and not to get, you know, into the market system and things like that,
Yeah.
but it's a reality when we commodify ourselves for whatever it is you do for a living, a football player or a therapist or a physician working ridiculous shifts, you know, or anything, assembly
Exactly.
line workers. Yeah, that's not built into the calculus necessarily. And if you look back to the 19th century, it certainly wasn't in the calculus because they worked
Right.
6 days a week. You got Sunday off, and you know that was it. So we've come along, but
Yeah.
I think you're right. I think that work-life balance
Hmm.
really, and I would think if I were the head of a corporation or I was a team lead on something like that to that tier, that I would consider that to be valuable. That you're giving
Yeah.
up a little bit of productivity, but you're getting a better worker. You know, so if we continue in that paradigm, seems like you know you would benefit more from
Right.
acknowledging and facilitating a space for
Yeah.
people.
I know one of my first jobs in community mental health was I had to make a certain amount of money through insurance. Like I actually had a quota,
Wow.
which to me, now looking back, is like mind-boggling because
Yeah.
I'm dealing with humans. Like humans shouldn't be a number like that from
Right.
insurance, right? Like
Right.
they would push like unethical practices of like stay on the client on the call with a client for at least 8 minutes because then you can bill for 15.
Okay.
And I went, this is not okay. Like this, we should not be treating clients this way, nor should therapists be treated that way either.
Right.
Because we're dealing with human psyches, we're dealing with the person, the nervous system, all of it. And that deserves respect. And I think sometimes, like you said, in our medical system, it's not viewed that way.
Hmm.
And it's kind of like holistic. Every person is a individual that has needs.
Right. Right. And I'm not clever enough to figure out how you move towards that, how you arc
Either.
towards that. But it would be nice if we had that, if that conversation started brewing out there,
Yeah.
you know, in the market system commons to figure these kind of things out because
Right.
you know, the payoff. I just interviewed, not to go on a tangent, but I just interviewed a biologist who was a hologenomics biologist, and he was putting up these like proactive ideas that the downstream effect um, will benefit financially and
Hmm.
you know all the other positive things that can come out
Right.
of it. And he was making these points, you know, but very simple changes on one end that could have that effect. And I think if there are clever enough people out there that could do that kind of
I
thinking
agree.
and calculus, yeah, it would be good.
Yeah.
So you mentioned your hip pain, and I know in our pre-meet conversation you had talked about bringing somatic therapy in.
Yeah.
So that hip pain, I would intuit, was you you know, embodying the stress, the anxiety, and all these things. So let's open that up if you want, and we'll
Yeah.
talk about
Yeah.
your work with it and your personal experience. So, you know,
Hmm.
where did the pelvic pain come from ish? You know, we don't have to go into
Yeah.
gory details, but yeah, what's going on with that?
Yeah. Yeah. It's the pelvic pain is mind body pain,
Yeah.
right? Like I had every scan under the sun done, every MRI, every CAT scan, everything. I almost ended up having laparoscopic surgery because they thought it was endometriosis.
Okay. Okay.
Luckily, thank God that doctor said, no, we're
Mm.
not doing it. You're too young. You don't have it. You're fine. And I went, oh my gosh, thank goodness. Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I was given every diagnosis under the sun, interstitial cystitis, pelvic neural, like you name it, every
Yeah.
diagnosis under the sun until I figured out that this is mind body pain. This is literally all coming from the brain and the nervous system because of chronic dysregulation and chronic not feeling your feelings, essentially, right? Like suppressing and suppressing until what Nicole Sachs, she's a therapist in the mind body world, she calls it like your emotional reservoir overflowing. And eventually, because you don't feel your really deep feelings of like fear, doubt, rage, anger, guilt, like if we don't feel these things, your brain's going to give you pain because that's easier to deal with than all of these really big, scary emotions, because your nervous system thinks that if you feel these things, you're going to die. That's how scary they are.
Yeah.
Spoiler alert, no one has died from feeling their feelings. Right. It's just a thing. But they feel so intense that the brain's like, threat, 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 can't handle this. So it gives you pain instead, which is what exactly was going on in my body. And so the idea with any kind of neuroplastic pain, and of course, if anyone is dealing with pain, please go get it checked out structurally by a doctor. Like we need to rule out anything physical, anything structural. And if it's not structural, it's more than likely mind-body pain. And we need to get to the root. What are we scared of? What are those big things that we don't want to deal with? Because that's the way out of any kind of mind-body pain.
And in acknowledging that and moving through a kind of course correction with a licensed therapist, what's the turnaround time on moving in that direction? And it's, you know, approximate, you know, just like if there's not a lot of resistance and the patient is willing to work and motivated, I would imagine it's not quite glacial, but it seems like it would take some time to
absolutely
get that to shift.
Right. I've been dealing with it for 10 years, and it really wasn't the last, I would say this year, maybe a little bit of last year, where I've made the most progress. Because and also like I've prepared myself in order to go really deep into the things that I'd never wanted to deal with. And that takes time because you need to increase your capacity for stress and to handle really big emotions and the things that are really scary for you. So it takes kind of creating a foundation for that, regulating the nervous system enough where you can start to go into things that are, you know, in the big black hole where you're like, I don't want to touch that, right? Not going there. And so the time ranges for people, right? Like, I mean, I've had coaches and people in the mind body space that have had pain for a year, 2, 3, 10, and like healing. My coach currently that I have, she goes, it's going to take as long as it takes at the end of the day, right? And putting a timeline on it sometimes isn't helpful, because then we're like, I'm not healed yet. What I'm doing something wrong.
Right.
Versus you're not. It's just undoing 30 years, 20 years, 40, 50 years of a dysregulated nervous system takes time. We're undoing years and years of habits and conditioning. And so it's worth it in the end. And it also takes time, and it's okay that it takes time.
Which might be a tricky barrier to penetrate, because again, going to modernity and where we find ourselves, we seem to be more and more in an instant gratification culture, and so the client or the patient might walk through the door and go like, I've got 25 minutes to change, you know, to unscrew 50 years of my life. Let's go. And they're like, yeah, you got 10 years or you got 5 years to get started on this.
I always tell clients, I'm like, if I had a magic pill that would get rid of all your problems, I'd give you one and myself one. And then I wouldn't have a job, and I'd be on a private island somewhere with my own personal dolphin that I can play with at all times.
Right.
But like, it's still in the factory. Like I'm still working on it. It might take a while, right?
And there are probably people out there trying to develop that pill.
Exactly. And so I always, right. It's like, I wish it worked that way. I wish we could just take something and it all be better. And unfortunately, like that's just not how humans are. That's not how our brains work. Neuroplasticity, right? Like it takes time to undo and create new neural pathways in our brain through repetition over and over and over until it becomes annoying and you still have to do it, right? And that's just how our brain works. It's possible, but it takes a lot of work. And I think the payoff is immense. Like it is just you become a new person. Like I feel like I'm a completely new and different person than I was even a couple of years ago. And I'm creating a life where it's much more balanced, where I can do what I love to do and also take care of myself, because I wasn't doing that. I was completely self-abandoning myself when I was seeing 8 clients a day. I really went to like, I had to rush in between sessions to go to the bathroom. I wasn't eating very much in between. I had to like nibble really fast. So no wonder my body was like, we're going to give you crazy pain because you're not listening to our needs.
Yeah. 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 There's a deep incongruity there with you availing yourself as a therapist and a healer, and you're in degradation. You're in this not sympathetic state, you know? So,
Exactly.
yeah.
Right.
That's good. And that's good that you recognize that, and that you extracted yourself out, and you found a path that is more in congruity with what, you know, you as Gabby can do. And that's laudable for sure, and hopefully inspiring to others. And I was thinking about, you were talking about meditation earlier, and the fast way out, or the slow way out. I would think, for me, if I were to lecture myself as I'm going through this, I would say, you know, Buddhist monks don't go into the monastery for 2 weeks and they come out, you know, after a 10-day retreat, and they've got that, whatever it is that they're seeking, and that they've mastered. You know, they've got to go in for tens of thousands of hours of, you know, just sitting there in silence and killing the monkey mind. And you know, so that's maybe a good analogy to, yeah, you're not this. So it's about mastery. It's about, you know, getting to that point where you are reshaping the psyche, more or less, you know, or allowing the psyche to do its process in a positive valence, and not so much with the old habits and the patterns and so forth. Now, speaking of the somatic therapy and things being in sympathy, are there complementary practices that have maybe either overlap or are beneficial to support? So when you are working, and I know you're doing coaching now, but theoretically, when you're working with a client patient, that sort of spoken therapy and semantic therapy that complements well with getting people to feel their bodies. Is there a go-to system that or modality that therapists like to work with?
Yeah, I mean, I'm trained in a somatic experiencing through Peter Levine. So Peter Levine's work with regulating the nervous system, and also that trauma gets stuck in the body. That's the biggest premise of what Peter has found out through his research with animals and animal behavior, right? Animals are really good at discharging fight, flight, freeze energy. But because we have a brain, and especially our prefrontal cortex, ours gets stuck, because then the mind starts to come in and over analyze and think about what has happened, versus allowing the body to do what it knows how to do innately and intelligently, right? Like when there's an animal being chased by a tiger, like an impala, they showed us this video. What's so cool is that the impala will go into freeze because it can't fight and it can't run away because it's not fast enough. And so it goes into complete frozen, like I need to surrender. And what happens is when the tiger or lion leaves, what the impala will do is it'll start to shake, right? It's releasing that stuck energy. It looks around, it goes, I'm safe, and runs off. No longer traumatized. There's no trauma within that impala's body. When we go through trauma and we don't get to fight, don't get to run away, or we go into freeze, it gets stuck. Right? So in somatic therapy, the idea is to get to that response and allow someone to fight in the office, meaning like very slowly, like for example, if they want to punch, like do something very slowly with the body. Sometimes a client will literally start to like run in their chair, like this, you know, the movement of running, and then getting someone out of freeze, right? So bringing movement back into the body slowly so they can discharge some of that frozen, stuck energy, right? And this is a process, because for a lot of people, this is scary. This is where the trauma happened, right? So we usually have to start off with clients getting used to like their environment. What does it feel like to connect to the room? What are you noticing about the room, right? What colors are you noticing? Even that can be activating for people. So we do what we call like titration, little baby steps. Notice and then come out. Oh, what does it feel like to be in your body? Notice that and then come out. okay, let's go back to the environment, right? So that we don't overwhelm or flood people, because flooding people in therapy is very challenging to get them back to a
Mm,
somewhat of a baseline, right?
sure,
And so
sure.
this idea of titration
Hmm.
is really important in
Mm,
NFC specifically.
mm. Do you notice when we talk about freezing, and I might be going out of bounds thinking imaginatively here, like depersonalization and sort of dissociative states, is
Yep.
that part of the freeze process wherein you just sort of derealize the situation when you're in the trauma, and then like you said, you're kind of locked in on that for a little bit, and that could certainly pathologize and take people down a bad path because we are
Absolutely.
metaconscious.
Yes. And burnout is also a freeze response as well.
Okay.
The body goes, I can't do this anymore. This is too much stress, too much anxiety. So it just shuts off and it conserves energy. Because the whole point of our nervous system is to keep us alive,
Mm,
survive,
right.
right? And so when we're under that much stress or threat, because all of our threats are emotional these days, because we're not getting chased by tigers, at least I hope we're not in today's
Yeah,
modern
most
world,
of us. Yeah.
right? The body will just go into complete freeze, and we're basically doing, we're running on 20%, but we need to do 80% of work. And
Hmm.
so that's where that like physical, mental exhaustion, cynicism, hopelessness kind of
Mm,
comes from, because we just feel stuck. Like
hmm.
there's no way out. And so the body's like, I need to conserve because I can't really do anything else, because we can't fight, we can't run. So freeze is our next best option.
Mm, mm. And you do work with burnout. I'm glad you brought that up.
Mm,
In with regard to burn, and I'm a graduate of that school myself.
yeah.
My wife and I opened up a restaurant about 20 years ago, 22 years ago now.
Yeah.
Hard to believe it's been that long. But
Right.
yeah, we were going 6 days a week for years with that thing. And the day off was a joke. We had to catch up on everything else.
Right.
But yeah, I remember in that period going through layers and layers of burnout, where you,
Hmm.
you thought you couldn't burn out anymore. And then
Right.
guess what? Yeah. And you don't have many options. So,
Exactly. Yeah.
so yeah, and that's kind of where we find ourselves in modernity in the West is,
Hmm.
we're talking, I'm not being critical. It's just an acknowledgement that, we're
Right.
a hustle culture and go, go, go and produce and, achieve and all these kind of things. Yeah, and I think you started a moment ago to define burnout vis-a-vis, maybe continued prolonged stress or short, acute stress.
Hmm.
So do you want to, for the audience, maybe, and you did this a minute ago, but maybe the outlying indications of what burnout is vis-a-vis, you're having a bad week, you're stressed out, or maybe the other pressures that are building, how would they recognize that they're burning out? I mean, it's obvious in some ways, but
Yeah.
how would they categorize that to be distinct as burnout?
Hmm. The hallmark of burnout is just complete mental and physical exhaustion. Like
Okay.
it is just, it's dread of like, I don't want to live my life anymore. I don't want to go to work. I don't want to be in my relationship. I don't, want to parent anymore. Like it's just too much. It's
Hmm.
this kind of like cynicism towards life,
Hmm.
of like my life sucks, it's never going to get better, I'm stuck like this forever, right? So there's that kind of like hopelessness, helplessness of like, it's, I don't really have anywhere to go, like this is, I just have to live my life this way.
Hmm.
And then you can have anxiety, you can have trouble sleeping. I think it's a little bit more like bio individual with like some of the other symptoms as well. Some people like me, like I had to take Klonopin every single day. I had to mask it somehow. Like for, there could be other things that people use to kind of self-medicate.
Hmm.
But I think those are kind of the hallmarks, is like this exhaustion, the cynicism, this hopelessness, of like, I don't have any options. Like this is it, right? Of like, I have to keep going this way. And my biggest thing with clients is like, you don't. And so the way I like to work with clients is like, how do we give your nervous system options? The nervous system loves options. It loves it because it's kind of like a quote unquote way out,
Mm.
right? Because when we're burnt out, like it's like tunnel vision. Like it's only this. It can never be anything else, right? So if we give someone options of like, hey, maybe you can switch departments at your job. Maybe you can ask to work less hours. Maybe you can shift your hours, right? Maybe it's getting a new job in general, or it's setting boundaries in your relationship. Like there are so many things that we can do that can lessen the load and give us relief that like, I don't have to do this forever. Like there are ways out of this, which usually helps people just, it's like almost instant relief in the moment. Because then our nervous system is like, oh, we can do this and this and this and this and this. I'm not stuck. Okay, cool. Right. And then we can work towards releasing some of that freeze response to start to bring in mobilization into other options, other things that we can do for ourselves.
It strikes me that relationships would be a flexibility option for somebody in this mode that you're in, the transitional mode that you're talking about. But the career, is there resistance when you get them to acknowledge that their job that they're in is you know, a huge vector of that burnout? And I say this like I'm imagining myself, like I would be upset to think that I would have to transition a job to get out. I probably bullheaded enough myself that I would do it, but I worry for people who, I'm trying to empathize with people who are like, oh my God, I can't leave my job, you know, the world will come to an end and all these kind of things. They're in, you know, sort of reinforcing that. So, but yeah, optioning, I guess if you're committed to acknowledging the burnout and wanting the change, that it maybe would be it would seem doable or feasible to say, I'm walking away from that job. You know, give yourself justifications for why. Maybe it doesn't pay enough to justify your being burned out. You know, I guess so it's not really a question. It's just sort of thinking out loud, like, oh my gosh, you know, I could see, you know, again, if you're in a crappy relationship, well, sayonara, you know, goodbye. Or if your parents are driving you mad, then you put a wall up there for a little while. Or, hey, I'm going to take a sabbatical from you guys. Yeah, I've done that. It's like, sorry. Yeah. But yeah, that can be scary for people, I think, right? To have to face these kind of existential issues, like your spouse might have to go, or you might have to distance yourself from your children, or whatever the scenario is.
Yeah,
it's not easy. It's not,
especially because a lot of people identify in their job. So like, I'm a fill in the blank, right? This is who I am. Like this is me, right? And so I think that's where it becomes tricky with careers and jobs, is that, you know, reminding people that like, you're not your job. Like you do your job. It's a hat that you wear, an important one, because you're contributing to the world, and you're still you without a job, without whatever profession that you're in.
Right.
And so it can be really scary for people, especially realizing that what they're doing might not be like good, healthy, or balanced for them, because they're like, maybe they had really high hopes for their job, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, maybe it's not what I thought it was. And even relationships, even though it seems like it's so easy to just put up boundaries, for a lot of people it's really difficult, because there's so much history that comes with families and relationships and trauma. Like there's, you know, and so sometimes, and people pleasing, that's a huge one. It's a trauma response. Fawning is, so fight, flight, freeze. Fawning is one that we don't really talk about that much.
Okay.
And so, and there's people pleasing. Putting up boundaries is really, really difficult, because you don't want to upset someone else. You don't want to make them angry, right? So then it's easier sometimes to fawn and to be like, oh, it's fine, it's fine, it's fine, I'll deal with it, versus saying no, or putting up a boundary, or stepping back, right? And so allowing people to realize that that is something that they're going through, and how do we teach boundaries in a titrated, slow way, so it's not like, oh, I just have to say no. Well, it's not gonna happen. Like, you've never said no before, right?
Yeah. You gotta work your way up to that.
Exactly. And so it's so bio individual, right?
Right.
And we're just so complicated as humans, and that's why it's really important to approach each client as like, what do you have going on? How can I help you specifically? Because your situation is gonna be different than another client's situation. Right.
and that same biologist that I was talking to this morning made a good point that echoes exactly what you said, and that we were talking pharmacology and suitability of, you know, whatever the serotonin receptor agonists or the SSRIs that you're taking. Each person in their unique biochemistry is going to, some people are going to get positive results and some people are going to have sudden suicidal ideation because of, you know, what you're manipulating that endocrine system and the chemistry and so forth. So yeah, it's same thing with the spoken therapy and using the psyche as a tool, as a access point into somebody to do the work with them. You were talking about boundary setting and being able to withdraw when necessary. There was a movie by Michael Mann, I think in '96, and it was called Heat, with De Niro and Pacino. It was this really hyper dramatic police thing, and but I think it was De Niro had a line in this movie, and it says, he says several times in the movie, "Don't let yourself become attached to anything that you are not prepared to walk out on in 30 seconds or less, should you feel the heat coming around the corner." You know, that's the title of the movie. And he had to live that because oh, I can't remember the actress's name, but he had a relationship with somebody, and the heat was coming around the corner, and he had to leave her sitting in a car because he was coming to get her. But he knew if he walked over to the car that she would be implicated in the crime that was being committed. So I bring that up, and hopefully the audience isn't rolling their eyes, but it's a good quote. It
is. And like even in the Buddhist tradition, like this notion of like non-attachment, right?
And impermanence.
And impermanence, that like, and I tell clients all the time, I'm like, nothing ever stays the same. Things are always changing. Your emotions also change. Like that's why sitting in them is so valuable, because it's like a wave. It's going to go up and eventually it's going to go back down. That's essentially how we want our nervous system to work, is like we get activated and then we deactivate. We activate, we do what we need to come back into the moment, and then it goes back down, right? Versus being stuck in one or the other, sympathetic or parasympathetic, or both at the same time, because you can have both on freeze and fight or flight at the same time. And so we want to restore that beautiful smaller wave instead of the big crashing.
Right. The bipolar. Amy Brennan was the actress I was trying to think of a minute ago. And again, I'll keep, you know, saying us in the West, and you know, that is the Buddhist mindset, and the Four Noble Truths are a great wisdom practice compared to our sort of American, inheriting the legacy of Protestant sensibilities of you know, stiff upper lip, and you know, be stoic and you know, persevere, and you know, chin up and all. Come on,
right?
we're paying a price for that, you know. That's the Moloch's dilemma, or a bad cost benefit analysis. So. And you were talking about Klonopin earlier, and I think about this sometimes, and some people are going to cringe, but can you imagine if in the United States, if you know, magic wand, if we could take away the alcohol, marijuana, fentanyl, and the above board psychiatric drugs, civilization would collapse. I just think everything would collapse, because a lot of us, and you know, I've been sober for years, but I self-medicated for a long time. And I just try to think of what that would do to our culture if we suddenly didn't have our, you know, crutch is a strong word, but our self-medication, you know, whether it was prescribed by a doctor or we go get a 12-pack to, you know, kind of knock out the stress, or smoke a joint, or whatever it is that people are doing.
I know.
You know, you think about that.
It wasn't until I started working with my current coach a couple of months ago where one of my goals was to stop. And again, I was only taking the Klonopin because the pain was so high. But I went, I don't want to be on this medication anymore, because I can handle sitting in the pain and telling my brain that I'm okay in this moment, that nothing is wrong with me, that I'm okay. And it took me a while. And I can be the first one to say I haven't probably taken it in probably 2 or 3 months. And that for me is like the biggest victory ever. But like what you were saying, it's so true, because we don't want to feel these really big things, and these quote unquote crutches it's just a band-aid. It's like, I don't want to feel this, so I'm going to drink. I don't want to feel this, so I'm going to take a Klonopin. I don't want to feel this, so I'm going to go shopping, whatever it is.
Right.
What it is. It's just avoidance, which is so natural. It's a part of us that's protecting us. And the biggest thing I've learned is to be compassionate towards that part, because that part just wants to protect me and keep me safe.
Yeah.
Right. And it's also not helping me. I mean, it is in that way, but it's not helping me to get to where I want to be, because then I'm not feeling everything that I need to feel. And I think it's so natural, because we don't want to feel big, scary things, because our nervous system thinks we're going to die, literally.
Yeah.
And so we just cover it up, when the antidote is to feel them. That is the way out. That's what we have to do to teach our brain that, like, we can feel these things and still be okay. And then the quicker we'll be able to process and let that stuff go and out.
Right.
But
Right.
I think society would collapse, because then everyone would have to start feeling their feelings, and then what?
Yeah, yeah. And even though I've been sober for years, I still lean into a little chocolate now and then. I want that
Totally.
dopamine. So but I would much prefer what I do now versus
Yeah.
what I did for years.
Right.
And I don't judge myself at all, because I had a kind of a crappy childhood, and
Yeah.
it's on the scale, it wasn't bad compared to a lot of people, but there were reasons why I was self-medicating, and I
Yeah.
started at a very young age and kept going for years. But
Mhm.
I would prefer the way I'm doing things now, and so tea
Same.
and coffee and a little sugar here and there,
Right.
little treats once in a while, which do give
First.
you a little bit of serotonin and dopamine. But to anybody in the audience who's in that lifestyle change, and maybe working on sobering up, or whatever, I would encourage that, because it's not scary being sober. And I can remember when I was drinking or whatever, and just the thought, oh, perish the
Yeah.
no, why would I want to be sober? That's terrible. Yeah.
Exactly.
But
Yeah.
anyway, it's doable, and when you're on
And
the other side, life is fine.
exactly. And there's so many people, there's so many resources for addiction, whether it's
Right.
AA, NA,
Yeah.
therapists, their CADC, their certification for drugs and alcohol.
Hmm.
Um, it's possible. We just need to get underneath what we're covering with any addiction. And like you said, it's being on the other side it's so rewarding. Like, it sucks being in it and like working your way out of it. It's terrible and it sucks. But again, that's the only way out, is to go through.
Hmm. Hmm.
And it's worth going through it's kind of like a lotus flower. That's always my kind of analogy, right? Like, you
Yeah.
have to go through the mud and the really nasty, icky dirt in order to get back up to the sun. Like,
Yeah.
that's just truth. It's reality. It's what happens.
Yeah.
But like you said, it's worth it in the end.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think so. And the scariness, the fear of the future, fear of the unknown, in that anxiety that comes up from letting go of those chemicals,
Yeah.
might be an analog to that, like you're saying, the deep existential scary, all the chapters of the little micro chapters of drama, trauma,
Yeah.
injury, psychic injury that occurred, and we all onboard that. I don't care how much of a charmed life somebody's led, you're
Totally.
onboarding everything, good and bad, and we may not. That's in the obfuscated consciousness, and so
Right.
so it's there. It's all part of the. You're not an outlier. It's all
Well,
good. It's
you're
all good.
human.
Yeah.
You're human. We all
Yeah.
we all have our little things that we do, right? And avoiding or suppressing is such a common defense mechanism. Like, it is one of the most common, and
Hmm.
we get taught, and I think a lot of it is conditioning. Like, we don't get taught to feel our feelings. At least my generation, I think older generations, like, wasn't a thing. I think
Yeah.
we're talking about mental health more, which I'm so grateful for. Right, we weren't given the skills to, what does it feel like to feel anxiety in your body? Like, what does it feel like to be depressed, like, or
Yeah.
anxious or angry or fearful? Like, we weren't taught these
No.
skills.
No. It was very barbaric.
Right.
I'm a child of the 70s, and the motto back then was, I'll give you a reason to cry. Yeah, that kind of mentality. I heard that so many
Exactly.
times. But
My parents grew up in Poland, and if
oh
someone
yeah.
came back with a yellow sheet, like, that means they went to a psychiatrist. Like, you were considered crazy.
Oh yeah, the
Like,
stigma, I'm
the
sure.
stigma, like, and so again, nobody talked about mental health. Nobody talked about, if someone committed suicide in like the village or something like that, because they couldn't handle what was going on mentally. Like, it was just not talked about.
Hmm.
And so no wonder we don't have the tools and the resources and the techniques to be able to handle all of this.
Yeah.
Which is why I'm so grateful that you and other people like have podcasts like this where we can talk about these things.
Yeah. Yeah.
And share and spread the message.
Right.
Like,
no, absolutely. And the work that you're doing, to bring you into it, and we as a community, little bit, and there's a guy I follow, his name's Snowden, and he's a complexity systems scientist or complexity theory scientist, and he says, a lot of the way we can do sense making, way making, and problem solving is in small clusters. We can't scale this kind of complex human psychological problem solving at en masse. We can't do a billion people at a time in a collective kind of approach.
Yeah.
It is these small little clusters. So you, myself, this audience, the people that are going to watch this, if there are takeaways, that's where I think the jazz is, or the magic is going on in transitioning. And then when that's happening iteratively and it can then scale independently, then we can see some noticeable changes. But yeah, I agree with you.
Yeah, and then the ripple effect, right? Like how one person will then talk to another person. Oh, I'm learning this in therapy. I'm learning this in coaching. And then they'll say to that person, and it just grows, right? As we continue to talk about these things and this like beautiful ripple effect that can happen, which, I feel like to me, like that's part of why I do all of this, right? So that it can just impact more and more people over time.
Let's reconnect with you had mentioned earlier about your being in this transition from a licensed clinical social worker to now a coach, which I love because you're undergirding the architecture of who you are as you present yourself as a professional. I not that my opinion matters, but I feel so comfortable that you are a coach in that sense, because we talked about this in the pre-meet that there are people with, probably good intentions and acting in good faith who are coaching, but they may be straying over into doing therapy with people, which I think, I'm not to judge, but just that you have that is good. Vis-a-vis somebody who just took an online course for 6 weeks and they've got their coaching certificate and they get these clients and they mean well, but they're starting to do therapy and it may not be a good means of supporting that client. So that you do that is good. To get to a question, you're now a coach and you are again undergirded by this background in therapy. What are your aspirations? I know you have yourself established, but what do you see for yourself and growing your practice and what's your vision? What are you visioning?
Yeah, even for me, just like financial freedom and having this kind of balance between I'm helping people and making an impact and also having the ability to travel to just say like next week I want to go to Spain and like being able to do that and just being comfortable in that way. But like for my practice itself, like transitioning from a therapist is like you're kind of small, right? You're like in your community, you're in the practice that you're working at. And it's just like your little community. With coaching, what's cool is I can work with anybody all over the world, all over the US. Like I can have a bigger impact with coaching on a bigger scale than I was with just doing therapy. And like I love doing therapy and I want to continue that on a smaller scale and really kind of expand the coaching into how much of an impact can I have, right? Like maybe potentially like speaking events, right? With like bigger, larger audiences. Again, continuing to do podcasts where I can share this message again on a bigger scale than what I could ever do in therapy. Because in therapy, again, you're just limited to the people that are in your community. And what's cool with coaching is you can reach so many more people from all over and different backgrounds. And especially because I've been through burnout, like I get it. Like I understand it. Like I have been there. And so therefore, not only do I have, like you said, the clinical skills, but I also have the experience to be able to help people through it.
Yeah. Nothing beats lived experience.
Exactly.
A posteriori, as the fancy people would say, you've got that knowledge versus the a priori that it's all theoretical. Now, I wasn't bashing coaching earlier when I said a coach could be well intended, but also maybe stray over lines a little bit. I know good coaches will refer out and they'll know
Yes.
that stopping point and they'll say, I've got a therapist that, we can pause this conversation or we can scale back a little.
Right.
But you, again, given what you've got going for you, I would say your referral threshold might be maybe a little higher. And how do you, as a coach with an ethical
Hmm.
grounding, how do you handle that? Where do you sort of draw lines from coaching to oh, we're entering into,
Yeah, that I feel like that line is so fuzzy. It's not, it's so gray. Like there's no black and white with that. But I think for the biggest thing for me, both on a therapy level and on a coaching level, is I have to be in my area of expertise.
Okay.
If I'm outside of that, whether that's in coaching or in therapy, I refer out because there's some things that I just don't have a specialty in. And I can't work with that person because I just don't know enough to be able to help them. Right. So if we're talking about substance abuse, that refer out. If
Mm-hmm.
it's a really, really complex trauma, I'm going to refer out because I just don't have enough skills to be able to help someone with like complex PTSD,
Mm-hmm.
for example. And there's other things that I just don't work with. And so if it's like, anxiety, depression, a little bit of trauma, if it's like chronic stress and regulating the nervous system, I'm all burnout. I'm all for it. But if it's something else, like it's just code of ethics, even in being a social worker, like I just can't work outside of my expertise.
Right.
It's not ethical, nor is it fair for clients because there are people who have that specialty that they can, you know, those therapists can help them way more.
Yeah. Yeah. Good to know. Good to know. Um, I think what I'd like to do now is I've asked a lot of questions, so I'll ask you one kind of general question, and that
Yeah.
is, in our conversation, is there something else that you want to bring to the fore, uh, for the audience?
Mhm.
It could be something that helps them find your work and learn more about you, or if there's just something you don't think we've covered in this conversation, if you want to go over anything. Well, this is the improv moment. Yeah,
I
freewheeling.
think, yeah, the first thing that popped up in my mind was this again, coming back to this idea that like nothing ever stays the same.
Mm,
This idea that like, and my one of my favorite quotes is by Courtney C. Stevens, like nothing changes if nothing changes.
mm, mm.
I think if you want change in your life, you have to seek it and you have to do something different. And that there is so much support available for anyone struggling with anything. Like it's there and you have to find it and then you have to do the work. And the work sucks and it's hard and it feels impossible at times. And I had a coach that she told me, she goes, do you have two arms? And I'm like, yeah. She goes, do you have two legs? And I'm like, yeah. She goes, then you're not special. Like you can heal from this pain just like anyone else that has healed because you're not uniquely special or broken. Like you're just a human that can do all of these things. And now being mostly on the other side, she's right.
Mm,
I'm
mm,
not I'm not uniquely special or broken in that way, just like nobody else is, right?
mhm, mhm,
Put your mind to it. You can do the healing work for yourself and get to where you want to be, and it's going to be hard. Like it's
mm.
going to be really, really challenging, and it's also worth it. And being on the other end of it.
Yeah, yeah. That is the ends that I couldn't, if there's somebody in the audience listening, that I couldn't encourage you enough to seek those ends, to seek that goal, and cross that line, because you and I have been there, and a lot of people have been there. And I think, again, the first few steps are a bit of a slog, because
Mhm.
it's patterning, it's behavior, it's
Exactly.
predictive processing. You're
Yep.
you're catastrophizing the frames that come up, and
Yeah.
of each moment that comes to you. And so yeah, it's an unenviable task in the beginning, but you're not alone. And I don't mean that in a stoic kind of way. It's that
Right.
there is support, and there's people
Yeah.
like you who are there to help facilitate that, and help
Yeah.
to be somebody's, oh, what are you? You're a way making guide. Yeah, you're a guide to the way making. So,
Right. Yeah. I would
oh
love to
my
support people.
God.
I would love to support people if they resonate with this kind of work, with the burnout and anxiety and like regulating their nervous system. I would love to support people. I'll do a little plug. My
Yeah.
website is GabbyWnekCoaching.com. People can read about my story there. People can read about the work in my program that I have. And then if they feel like it's a good fit, they can click on the book link and it'll take them to a free discovery call. And then we can talk about whether it's a good fit for the both of us to work together. So that's
Okay.
primarily where people can find me.
Okay. Okay. And that gesture was that everything will be in the description field to access Gabby's website. And if you have, I think you have an Instagram
I
that I
do.
found.
Yeah. It's the
Yeah.
same thing.
So
Gabby Wnek Coaching. Yeah.
okay. So if you're an Instagram person, you can
Mhm.
follow Gabby there. But yeah, I would encourage you to go to the website and give it a look. And yeah, Gabby, this has been a good conversation, and I appreciate you coming on board with me and having this talk because as we both mentioned earlier, it's these little gestures, these little moves. You never know how that's going to shift trajectories, and
Exactly.
so producing these kind of conversations is, I like to hope that it's good medicine for,
Yeah.
even if it's for one person.
I was
So
gonna, that's exactly what I was gonna say. Like, if I can help one person, it's not about, for me, it's not about saving the entire world. It's
no,
about, can I impact one life, two lives, right? And make a difference for someone to take action.
yeah. And there's a
Yeah.
radiation in that, as you said, it ripples out. And so that person's life will be changed and they'll advocate, or they will be an example, an exemplar
Exactly.
of, that you too can succeed and do it. And
Right.
it takes work and it's delayed gratification.
Yes.
But that's a future I would love to see where people are really, more aligned to that way of looking at things.
Yes.
And I think that, and not to get on a big tangent as we're winding down, but like, imbuing that in the children and helping new generations onboarding to have that as part of the package of learning, to
Yes.
say
I
that
agree.
it isn't about instant gratification and it isn't about um, chemical intervention and things like
Right.
that yeah, so here's to that. We'll hope for that. So
Exactly.
Gabby, this has been a wonderful conversation. And again, if you have any other thoughts, we don't have to cut now, but if you have any other thoughts you want to share, we can keep going. Otherwise, we can put a like Hollywood cut the scene, and you're always welcome to come back, especially if you've got anything new. Yeah, that's a wrap. Yeah,
That's a
that's
wrap.
it. But yeah, if you're certainly welcome to come back, and like I said, if you're premiering something, if you've got some new aspect of your
Yeah.
work coming out, some new feature of your website or anything, that the door's always open, and you're welcome to come
Yeah.
back, and we can have a talk and
Yeah.
explore ideas. But yeah, so again, if there's any other thoughts.
No, I think
Okay, some
we've
good
covered
terrain.
everything. I'm just grateful for the opportunity to have a really great conversation with you.
Oh yeah, yeah, and it was mutual. I appreciate the conversation because this could be like an ulterior thing for me that like every time I engage in a meaningful and productive conversation, it's a little bit of therapy for
There you go.
for this old guy.
Exactly.
It's like layers are shed or new
Right.
enlightening ideas are coming in, and it actually it moves me forward. Like I referenced a couple other guests and people
Right.
that have impressed upon me, and so this show is so beneficial in that regard because now if I go out on the street and I talk to somebody, I might have another person's kernel of wisdom
Right.
to to share and impart on someone else, and I'm just a conduit. It's not
Exactly.
a credit to my ego
You're
or
the
anything.
messenger.
Exactly.
Right.
And wow, that if I can die happy knowing that I was a helpful person, I guess is maybe a way to say
Exactly.
it. So
Exactly. I love that.
yeah, Gabby, I'll say goodbye to you after we hit stop the record. But to the YouTube audience and Spotify audience, I keep forgetting that I've moved to Spotify. So everyone out there, thank you guys so much. And again, hopefully there were some good takeaways for you all in this conversation. So very much appreciate your presence and your attention. So all right, take care, everyone.